ready to go? Okay, thank you, Mr. So we will now start. So I'd like to call this regular council meeting of February 8th, 2022 to order with adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes from the regular council meeting of January 25th. Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to just move on to announcements from the mayor, and I just kind of wanted to bring you up to speed with snow removal over the weekend. So our staff were out removing snow and actually ticketing vehicles and towing vehicles. So you're all aware we had 16 vehicles towed over the weekend and 9 tickets issued, some warnings, and we actually had an electrical cord seized. Somebody was illegally camping and plugged into one of our city buildings. So I don't believe they're camping there anymore. But I just want to let you know that definitely appreciate Bylaw going out, doing that. And it was kind of nice to come down to see that the center of downtown, the downtown core, was virtually clean from curb to curb. So it was good because now with the warmer weather and melting and the drains are open. So kudos to our staff for getting that done. And the community now knows when we ask them to move their vehicles that we're serious about that. So just going to move on now to item 9, bylaws, the council procedure bylaw. And so I'm going to ask if there's someone that would like to put that on the table, please. Councillor Charlotte.
The council procedures amendment bylaw number 2317 be adopted.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on that motion? That's a motion dealing with electrical IT presence at meetings. So I think that's with way things are going with our COVID and not being able to meet all the time, that allows our committee members and council to join electronically if they need to. Any other discussion on that motion?
So how long are we going on this one? Till the end of the year?
No, I think Ms. Floyd, with this one, we're going to, I think is it the end of February, end of March, and then we will revisit.
Sorry, Your Worship. So this amendment is just for the committees and commissions. We removed the cap on the number of meetings that they could attend electronically.
Okay, thank you. And so basically that's for the rest of the year, and there's a cap on regarding number of meetings.
Sorry, Your Worship. Yes, there's a cap technically for council, but at the last council meeting, you expanded that to be reconsidered on February 22nd.
Okay, and so for this one, there's no cap. We're good to go for the rest of the year.
For committees and commissions, but we need to reconsider council on February 22nd.
Okay, good. All right. Sorry to be confused here.
No worries.
Trying to get my package open. All right. So this is for committees and commissions. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9B, EOCP 420 Downie Street. Mr. Simon, any presentation on this before we delve into it?
To your worship, I'll pose the question to yourself and council. We do have a brief presentation prepared, but I know that this has been before council before, and there will be a presentation at the public hearing. So if you like, we do have a presentation. If not, then we can move right on to council deliberation.
Okay, council, your preference, Council Palmer?
I'll put the motion on the table. The official community plan amendment bylaw 2311 be read a first and second time.
Second for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 2. Councillor Palmer?
I'll speak to the motion after.
Okay, and then seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott?
I'll read it out.
Okay, go ahead.
that zoning amendment bylaw number 2312 be read first and second.
And Councillor Elliott seconding it, and you want to speak to it, Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Mayor Sulz, and thank you, Mr. Simon. And I think we're all pretty familiar with the file, so I certainly don't need a presentation here. And the public, there's lots of places that they can see that. And again, we'll see it later on. Couple questions. So one on the, just on the CD zone. And I've referred to this before, but the CD, certainly my preference would have been to find a zoning that's appropriate already in there. I won't belabor that point. Couple questions on the CD zone. So there's opportunity for some commercial entities in there, and that's maybe an area that I anticipate that some people might have some opposition to. The convenience store, I can't remember all the details, but there's a number of uses that are in there. And in terms of affordable housing and the province mandate, do we have a sense of why? Is that their ask, or is this an initiative from the city to include those other uses?
Through your worship, so the mixed use component of this project came up with a variety of factors. So it was also based on public consultation that was undertaken by BC Housing and their consultants that are working on the project. The OCP kind of did set the stage and envision this parcel to be more of a, I guess, more of a neighborhood hub where it would be providing for a variety of opportunities aside from just residential development. And that is something that, staff have heard from the community through these consultation procedures, is that, if we're going to be housing a larger portion of people in here, I believe it's approximately 174 units. So, there will be a substantial amount of people here, that having some basic amenities that will be complementary to the existing grocery store that's across the street would be of benefit. So it is something that has been heard. And as we move forward through the public hearing process, I'm sure that there may be comments for or against potential, mixed use development here.
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, that's interesting to council. The concern that I have is the dilution of the services in the downtown core. This is not that far away. It's very walkable to the downtown core. So it'll be interesting to see how the residents of the area respond to that. And also even the idea of having a convenience store there, is that competing directly with the south side market? That's not a reason not to do it, but is it, again, diluting from the downtown core? So that's one of the questions that I have, and I'll be interested to see if the public has any comment at all on that. I don't have a direct opinion necessarily on that. And then through the chair, the other question is on the height. So this is a 3-story and it's restricted to 45 feet, I think, something like that. Is that correct?
Mr. Simon, comment?
Through your worship, I'm just double checking the specific height right now. A maximum building height would be 15.5 meters. It's anticipated to be a 4-story building. Their conceptual renderings right now, and please bear in mind that it is all conceptual, show it at about 15.2 meters. We wanted to make sure that there's a little bit of grace room in that CD zone, so that as they get into detailed design phase, should council support the proposal, that we're not going to be seeing any variances come back for something quite minor. But it is anticipated to be 4 stories right now.
4 stories. And yeah, so that thanks for that clarification. I do remember that now. I wonder about, getting the best use from that area and higher density, so which means higher. So I'm appreciative of that aspect. Because if we were going higher after through an amendment, that would trigger another public hearing, I think. Whereas the mixed use, if it becomes more restrictive, I don't think that's going to trigger another public hearing if that's the outcome from the process.
You want to comment, Mr. Palmer, from Mr. Simon? Clarification?
Yeah, maybe just clarification on, so I know you never know until it's actually here what's substantive and what's not, but if suddenly, for example, the convenience store was taken out of the permitted uses in the CD zone before the third reading, that wouldn't be substantive.
Sorry, through your worship to Councillor Palmer. Yeah, it's generally, it does warrant further discussion internally to determine what is ultimately substantive in terms of changes to the bylaw after it has been through the public hearing stage. Generally, if you were taking out a use that's not really the primary intent of the zone, in my view, I wouldn't consider that to be a substantive amendment. But again, just with the caveat that it does warrant a more thorough discussion internally about what is ultimately substantive.
Okay. And then just one last comment on the height, that 15.2 meters. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in there for, so whether that's a patio on the top, if they had a garden space on the top of the building, that they'll be able to build that in. Would it allow an access, a roof access building on the top?
So through your worship, the wiggle room that I was referring to, so right now their renderings are showing about 15.2 meters, but within the CD zone, we put it in at 15.5 meters. So you'll see in the report package, figure number 2 shows approximately 15.2 meters in height. And that's just because they haven't ultimately finalized the design drawings. It's not like you're going to be able to get another 5th story out of that 0.3 meters. But with respect to rooftop patios, elevator, machinery, penthouses, stuff like that, and accesses to the front, there are provisions in the zoning bylaw that would already exempt some of those from being included in the maximum height calculation. It all depends on how much of a footprint of the roof it takes up. So if it's greater than, I'd have to double check, I believe if it's greater than 10%, then it would be included in height calculation. And if it's not greater than 10%, then it would be exempt.
Okay, and just one final question. Then in the hypothetical event that they put rooftop gardens or something like that, and it requires basically a railing or some kind of fencing around the top, would that be included in the height overall?
Through your worship, yeah, it potentially could be included in the height. And I'm just double checking the actual requirements because I know that we updated these in the most recent amendments to the zoning bylaw to provide some additional clarity. So no structure shall cover more than 10% of the roof area of the principal building, and rooftop patios and associated amenities would be included in that. So if the footprint of the rooftop patio was greater than 10% of the total footprint of the roof, then it would be considered part of building height, and it would need to be compliant with that 15.5 meter maximum height requirement. And if it was determined to be exceeding that, there's 2 options that the applicant would have at their disposal. They could apply to amend the CD zone, which again could potentially trigger a public hearing, or they could apply for a development variance permit.
Okay, and
One more comment because I have other councillors.
yeah, I'll let the other councillors go.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
So, Your Worship, just looking at the plans, there's 2, 3, and single bedroom apartments in this thing.
Right.
So the anticipated growth in population in that zone, possibly 500-600 people?
Mr. Simon, are we looking at that high or are we looking more like 400?
Through your worship, that's I'm just doing a quick calculation, so that's pretty bang on at 400. So we look at about 174 units. The average that we usually project out for population per household is 2.3. That's pretty typical, pretty standard. You'll have maybe a little bit more in some, a little bit less in others, but that would get us right around 400 people. But in terms of, the composition and the final numbers, it really is just a best guess based on the best available data at this point using that 2.3 number.
And that's 400 people in rental accommodation.
Correct.
Big win, big story. So did they give you any indication when this thing, like this goes to first, second reading day, third reading is the public forum? How close are we to getting this on the ground?
What do you think potentially for at least groundbreaking? Would we see groundbreaking this year at all, Mr. Simon? How do you feel?
Through your worship, that could most definitely be a possibility. Staff internally are obviously aware of the importance of projects like this one, especially when there's when they're being managed by the province, and we were seeing genuine rental housing. So after this process, should there be no changes, we have to go through the public hearing process. The bylaws have to come back for third reading and adoption. A development permit to detail, the conceptual designs of the building will need to come before Advisory Planning Commission and Council as well. And then after that development permit is approved, then there would be a process to review the building permit application. That being said, staff have been in close contact with the applicants to look at where we can overlap some of the background work that needs to be done, so that we can be reviewing, building permit drawings while the development permit is potentially making its way through the council review process, with the applicant being aware that if there's a change in one set of plans going through the process, then that will have to be reflected in all plans. So I think it could, potentially be within the realm of this year, but that will be, heavily dependent on the scheduling of the applicant.
It's just been 3 years in the queue here, and it just seems to take quite a bit of time to get through the provincial process. It'd just be if there's any way we can streamline things at the municipal level, I'm all for it. So I think most of the council would be in that ballpark.
Great, thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So, I think hopefully my last question. And the motivation is in that same theme, trying to mitigate any possibility of hiccups along the way. So the reason, Council, for my questions around rooftop patio is more and more modern buildings that I would consider best practices are having garden spaces, that kind of thing on the rooftops. The applicant will be going into detailed drawings and details on how they're going to design that. And if I'm just trying to create an encouragement to consider that aspect of the greening of the space on the top, and I think they had some of that in their conceptual plans. So the final question is, again, because of that perimeter there, if you have a meter high, say a glass meter high fence around the top or patio, what's the right word? The railing, thank you. Around there, something that's not going to be creating more massing on the top, but that's another meter. It sounds like that would be in that height. So by going from their design drawings of 5.2, or so their conceptual plans of 5.2 and giving them a 0.3 meter or 1 foot wiggle room, I'm just wondering, do they need more wiggle room? And when they get to the design, so maybe it's a moot point right now for the public hearing, but if they need that little extra thing, I don't want to have to go through a variance process. So would that be a minor thing after the public hearing? Or is that something we could even just say, okay, let's go up to 16.2 meters or, to give them that full meter extra wiggle room?
Through your worship, so I will say that staff have been working very closely with the applicants, and the lens that staff have applied to working with the applicants on crafting the CED zone is to minimize any potential conflicts that Councillor Palmer is raising here with future designs, to make sure that the zone is suitable for the intended building process, so that if there was a little bit of, I don't really want to say flexibility, because the CD zone is specific in what it's attempting to regulate, but we don't want to be coming back for a variance for 0.05 meters in maximum height of the building at a later point when they get into detailed design. We're quite confident that we've covered all the corners and that there shouldn't be any issues, and we can most definitely continue to work with the applicant. And if council does wish us to make minor changes in advance of the public hearing to increase maximum height, that is definitely something that's within the purview of council's control right now if they want to give that direction to staff.
So I'm not wanting to assume any of the work, and thank you, Mr. Simon, for that explanation. If it was helpful, I certainly would, in ensuring that we don't have that hiccup, a height hiccup of increasing that 15.5 meters to say 16.2 meters at this time, I would certainly be willing to do that. If you think it's unnecessary, then I'm content to carry on.
Through your worship, I'm sure from, and again, I can't speak for the applicant, but in speaking with developers and applicants, anytime there's more grace built into these zones, I know that they are happier with that. So if that's something that council wanted to do after first reading, I haven't received any indications that it's necessary at this point in time, but again, completely within council's discretion after first reading to, make that change and then do second reading as amended, and then we can go forward with advertising for the public hearing.
Okay, so Mayor Sulz, then on the procedural side, we're at first and second reading right now, and that's one of the advantages of doing one reading at a time, so we don't have to go back and forth.
So do you want to rescind you in the second, or want to rescind this and
go to first reading? Yes, we can either rescind or I can just amend the motion to be just first reading. I'll just rescind if the seconder is
rescinding first and second reading? So you say that you're okay with rescinding, so we're going to rescind what's in your package. We're going to go back and you're going to make another one, the zoning amendment bylaw 2312 be read the first time, is that correct?
That's correct. I'll make that motion that official community plan amendment bylaw 2311 be read a first time.
What?
2312.
I'll reiterate that after. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right, so I say seconder for that motion. So we're just doing first reading. So Councillor Ellett is seconding just first reading. Now, do you want to speak to that, please?
Yes. So the intent is to actually increase that height from 15.5 meters to 16.2 meters. That would allow a railing on the top, give that extra wiggle room to allow a railing to have the garden space. It might already be incorporated in their design, but I just don't want us to have a hiccup later on saying, okay, we need this little extra space. So I'd just like to give them that little bit of extra flexibility on their, when they go to detailed design.
And it doesn't force them to do that. It gives them the option of doing that. And then being on the top, if it's a rooftop garden, we would probably say some sort of railing, whether it be, aluminum with the small spines so that the sun can get through, or as Councillor Palmer has indicated, glass or something like that. So I guess it just goes back to height. It doesn't matter what the material is. So I don't want to get you off track with that. Any other comment from any of the other councillors? So Councillor Brooks Hill and Councillor Ryan.
I'm just wondering, so we're gonna do first reading, and then would it be possible to do the second reading on Thursday? Is that,
So to Councillor Brooks Hill, so right after this, I'll put a motion to amend bylaw 2311 to increase the building height to 16.2 meters maximum. And then after that, a third motion would be the second reading. So we get the second reading done today.
Okay, so I just want to go back. So we've got an amendment motion on here for 2312. Is that correct, Ms. Floyd?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct. That Councillor Palmer's motion was that zoning amendment bylaw 2312 be read a first time.
Okay, and then do we need, just for clarification, we're going to need another motion to increase that height before we go to second reading, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, then I'm just following protocol. All right, so the motion on the table is to read the zoning amendment bylaw 2312 a first time. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That motion is carried. So now, Councillor Palmer, do you want to put an amendment to the height on now?
Yes, so I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2312 be amended to increase the maximum building height to 16.2 meters.
Okay, so a seconder for that motion. Councillor Ryan, any further discussion on the motion? I think Councillor Palmer's explained himself well enough. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, so Councillor Palmer, do you want to go with the second reading, please?
So yes, I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2312 be read a second time.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Shirley. Any further discussion on that motion? Councillor Brooks Hill.
Just to go back to the commercial element, it seems like so long ago now. I know that there's quite a number of permitted uses in there. And I suspect Councillor Palmer is right. There will probably be some pushback from the community about that, but at some point, I can't remember who, someone at BC Housing was saying, what we're envisioning are some of the uses like a daycare or a convenience store.
That's correct.
I don't think they're going to accept a tenant for a pub there. I just don't see that. I don't think that's what they're interested in. They're interested in providing, you know, maybe a cafe, but I doubt there would be a pub like more. But they were looking more at the daycare and convenience store as potential uses.
So Councillor Palmer, and then I'll go to Mr. Simon.
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Brooks Hill. That's the concern I have. So the permitted uses secondary are animal clinic, cafes, care facilities, daycares, things like that, home occupations, local convenience store, amongst others, neighborhood pubs, neighborhood retail services, restaurant, retail sales, including grocery store and market. And so that's where I have some concern about the extensiveness of what's permitted in this CD zone. And that I really do look forward to hearing from the public as to, and I think maybe even more so from the downtown business community is this diluting our downtown core? That's the concern I would have.
Great. All right. Any further comment, Councillor Brooks Hill? Mr. Simon, any comments on the generality of items that are included in kind of a retail section in this CD zone? Are these kind of general overarching type things or specific to this zone? Just a general question.
Yeah, through your worship, I would view, the uses that are included in the zone as quite reflective of what we would see for a standard mixed use zone. And Councillor Palmer had kind of alluded to it earlier. And I know we don't want to go down this discussion too far, but the zones that we have in our zoning bylaw right now do need some tweaking to avoid the use of CD zones in the future. So this to me is quite reflective of a genuine mixed use zone in terms of the variety of uses that are permitted. But do bear in mind, they are intended to be secondary uses, right? So they're not the primary intent of the site. And I think one of the key things too, when we're looking at the commercial space, I'm trying to recall off the top of my head, I know it's in the report, exactly how much square meters, 195 square meters of dedicated commercial space, right? And the community has been very, very clear, and BC Housing has also, discussed about their desire to see a childcare facility in there. Everyone understands that that's a big need. You're just never 100% certain with respect to what tenants you're actually going to be able to get in the building. So the variety of uses does help, satisfy that need should there be any challenges with tenants. But do bear in mind, 195 square meters of commercial space starts to get used up pretty quickly when we're talking a town that already has limited space available for commercial uses.
Thank you for that. Councillor Palmer?
Through the chair, just for clarity, that 195 square meters, that's not in the bylaw specifically though, correct? That might be their intention, but it's not in the bylaw.
Through your worship, that is correct. I don't believe there's a condition of use that restricts the maximum amount of commercial space, but do bear in mind, these are secondary uses. So again, they can't be the primary intent of the site.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further comment on second reading? Councillor Brooks Hill.
Once again, I'd reiterate that, if this was a private developer, I'd probably want to see it more clearly specified, but BC Housing isn't really allowed to just build a bunch of commercial space. Like they're going to build rental housing. That's what they do. That's what their mandate is. And so by necessity, it will be a very small percentage in the end.
Great, thank you for that comment. Any, one last comment, Councillor Ollie?
Just on from BC Housing, have you received any indication of what, I mean, they've given some preliminary plans. Have they expressed any need for height or size or anything specific that they require? I mean, we want to be amenable to whatever they come up with, but if they're not asking for anything, why are we bothering?
Well, I think two things, and I'm not going to try and speak for Councillor Palmer, but I think he's trying to look at things from a perspective of potential to utilize some space that's up in the sky for green space for the residents there. And then they basically come with a tentative plan to Mr. Simon and his department. So they got some ideas as to what they want. And so what we've just done, or what we will do if we do second reading, is enhance their ability and their versatility. Is that not correct, Mr. Palmer? Was that your intention?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sulz, exactly. And mostly is to stop any further delays, because of some little technicality right there. So that's covered on that height.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, I mean, right up front, we just say we'll be amenable to whatever you give us. Just get going.
Yeah. Good. Any other comments from councillors? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to item 3. Someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councillor Charlotte.
Public hearing for bylaw number 2311 and bylaw number 2312 be scheduled on March 8th, 2022 in accordance with the Local Government Act.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on that motion? This is basically where the public will get to weigh in on both bylaws and give us the value of their opinions. Seeing no comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 4. Someone want to put that on the table? Councillor Ryan.
The council has considered what persons, organizations, and authorities may be affected by proposed official community plan amendment bylaw number 2311 pursuant to S 475 476 of the Local Government Act, and determined that persons, organizations, and authorities described in council report dated December 7th, 2021 are the persons, organizations, and authorities under the heading others consulted, and referrals sent to those persons, organizations, and authorities on or about May 21st are considered by council to be an appropriate opportunity for consultation given the nature of contemplated official community plan amendments, and that no party or entity has requested further consultation regarding the official community plan amendments.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? By the way, Councillor Ryan, you could actually go into auctioneering.
It's good to know.
So, yeah, just note I'll be opposed to this motion, but I won't go into any detail on it.
All right, good. Any further discussion from any other councillors? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Palmer is in opposition. Item number 5. Someone would put that on for me, please. Councillor Charlotte.
The pursuant to section 4773 of the Local Government Act, official community plan amendment bylaw number 2311 is consistent with the City of Revelstoke financial plan and solid waste management plan.
Okay, seconder for the motion, Councillor Ryan. Any further discussion or questions on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Simon, for that. We are now going to move on to item 11A, staff reports, community economic development, recovery task force update. So, Ms. Braun, any discussion on this, or are you okay with we put the motion on the table?
To your worship, I would recommend that number 1 and 2 be put on the table, and then we have a short presentation to give that specifically relates to the third recommendation.
Okay, so someone want to put item number 1, that and that on the table. Councillor Ryan, go ahead.
That all fees are prescribed in fees and charges bylaw number 2256 associated with vending or busking, use of sidewalks, use of city sidewalks for retail purposes, use of city sidewalks for dining purposes, use of city sidewalks for coffee shops and for outdoor patios be reduced to 0 for the year 2022, and that a fees and charges amending bylaw be brought forward for council's consideration on February 22nd, 2021. I think she meant February
2022, yeah. Thank you for that. Second for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 2, someone want to put that on? Councillor Ryan?
That a refund be authorized for any fees paid between January 1st, 2022 and February 8th, 2022 as prescribed in fees and charges by law number 2256 associated with vending or busking, use of sidewalks, use of city sidewalks for retail purposes, use of city sidewalks for dining purposes, use of city sidewalks for coffee shops and for outdoor patios.
Second for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 3, Ms. Braun, do you want to do a presentation before that we discuss that?
Yes, please. And if we could share the screen. Taha is started.
All right.
Okay. So just wanted to give a bit of a recap because it seems like we're living in Groundhog Day and revisiting this issue again and again. But here we are 2 years in, and I just wanted to give a bit of an overview of the Recovery Task Force, its purpose and function. So Taha, you can go to the next slide. So the task force was formed in 2020 based on a recommendation coming from the Economic Development Commission with input from our community partners, mostly located here at the Business and Visitor Information Center. So that's the Basin Business Advisor Program, Community Futures, Tourism Revelstoke, and the Chamber of Commerce. So the purpose of the working group and pulling together like this was to leverage resources accessible to each of the partners around the table, to hear directly from business leaders and key sector representatives, and to work together on a collaborative approach to problem solving in the face of what we didn't know day to day, was going to have an impact on the community. So it's been a quite busy few years. We have met probably, depending on the waves that are confronting us, once or twice a month. We leveraged a significant amount of external grant funding that was either directed by, Chamber of Commerce or Community Futures or Tourism Revelstoke to address specific needs of those different sectors. That included about $80,000 to support businesses through the recovery process, as well as upwards of $300,000 to support poverty reduction, emergency shelters, mental health and well-being, and food security in the wake of the pandemic and its impact on those most vulnerable residents. So we have shared reports with Council on an overview of the labour market challenges and worked to try to mitigate some of those impacts with our business partners. We've allocated resources to IT upgrades in our new space that will support digitization of businesses and social service sector organizations. We've distributed another round of masks using restart funds to ensure that our food and beverage businesses and tourism operators were well stocked up as we anticipated cases spiking with the Christmas ski season, which they did. And ultimately, we've been continuing with social service network biweekly calls to share information and resources. So it's been a very much a far-reaching collaborative process. So now planning is underway to work with the working group of the Social Development Committee to allocate further restart funds, which is before you today for your consideration. And Taha is going to say a little bit about where we are right now with COVID current conditions and get into kind of the background of that restart funding for support for the social sector.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to ask someone to put a motion number 3 on the table, that and add that. Oh, pardon me, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll just speak to these. Yeah, go ahead.
Presentation. Go ahead, Ingrid.
No, I was just going to say before Taha gets into the recovery funding for social service organizations, just these are issues we're working on now. So monitoring Omicron impacts, which Taha will share with you, continuing to support access to resources for business and social sector groups, supporting what you've already approved, waiving patio fees for businesses recommended by the Economic Development Commission and brought to planning to collaborate on. And poverty reduction strategy update, it's underway right now, working on digital adaptation for the social sector to track impacts, track access to services, track where the needs are coming from. And then just basically trying to do our best to forecast what the impacts will be as we head into the spring and summer on the visitor population, on workers, on staff shortages, and looking at what options we have to close those gaps, again, in collaboration with with our other business service sector partners like Community Futures and the Chamber of Commerce. So I'll let Taha take it from here in regards to the specific impacts of Omicron and COVID over the last year, and how we propose to use restart funds to support social sector recovery.
Go ahead, Taha.
Thank you. So just a quick review of the COVID-19 data that's available up till now. We saw that quite a large spike of cases around the New Year's and the week afterwards, and now that's dropped off. In the background there, you can see comparison to other communities. There are still communities that are seeing their spike after ours, but we seem to have hit it earlier than most due to that travel around that period. Following that, the vaccination rates for those aged 12 and older still quite high. We have that coverage in second doses really quite high compared to the rest of BC. Third doses a bit lower than some other areas. Amongst the 5 to 11 population, we do have somewhat higher coverage, but still not as high as it could be, and not as high as other age groups. This just shows that we're on the decline compared to other communities in terms of our rate, and that trend is going downward. So the impacts of COVID on low-income residents is ongoing, and we know that inflation has been higher across Canada. That's not a surprise, but in BC, that estimate is around 5% for 2021, and we know that impact on lower-income residents is the highest. They have a higher proportion of costs that they are inflexible, they're necessities. So when inflation affects those costs, the bottom line is affected, and there's less optional expenses to cut out. We know that lower vacancy rates and childcare availability is ongoing as an issue, and that there's work to address all of that, but it's continually affecting the low-income residents. And we know that as a result of closures throughout January and disruption to businesses and employment, we see that ripple through to employees' bottom lines. Reviewing some work that was done last year, we know that the living wage in Revelstoke went up again, and that we're now fourth in the province. We were third, but that our living wage is around $19.51 per hour. That just reflects that is calculated to reflect a living wage for a family. But notably, the costs of rental housing that were available for use in that calculation were lower than most would acknowledge is the market rate. It's difficult to compete that for a population under 10,000. We just don't have the data to support what our rental rate is that's statistically valid. But that wage would have gone up if it was anywhere closer to the market rental rate. Going back to the phases of COVID restart funding that we have covered.
I just have a question before you carry on.
Yeah,
so going back to the living wage, that $19.51 an hour is per adult in the household, or is that for one working person? I'm assuming that's for the man and the spouse in the or whatever for the people have two people family adults.
Yeah, that is for each adult. That's in like for for a couple, that would be for each adult that's earning a wage. So that does that is the assumption is that it's a household with a couple and two children, just so that it's possible to calculate that.
All right, good. Thanks for that clarification. All right, Councillor Elliott.
So our living wage is fourth highest in the province. So what would determine that? Like, is it our rent that's too high? Is it our food costs? What is it? Is it a culmination of all those things?
Yeah, it's a combination of all of those. When you would talk about even calculating inflation, there's a basket of goods that gets monitored and put into an inflation rate. The living wage also has a basket of goods, necessities that would be, so childcare would be in there, housing would be in there, food costs would be in there, transportation to some extent would be in there. All of the costs that you'd associate with living in Revelstoke.
Good. Council Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So just a question on that living wage. So that's for two people. I'm going to round the numbers here a little bit. So two people were approaching, basically, that's full-time employment. That's getting into the neighborhood of $75,000 to $80,000 per year is the limit for a family of four, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that sounds about correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, council? Saying none, carry on, Taha. Thanks for your patience.
No problem. Happy to answer. We have covered phase one of support for residents through the COVID Restart grant funding, and that support went directly to Community Connections and the Child Care Resource Center, and those were, impacts on residents that were just directly related to COVID. So the Emergency Situational Fund has now been spent, and we saw that that was used for various needs for emergency shelter before the emergency shelter program was established. That was a big chunk of funding that is now providing that program. Residents that are stuck between utilities and in that spot where they're going to be shut off, that they could access those funds. That medication, bus tickets, and dental expenses also can be those incidental costs that when things are tighter, it can be the difference between going over the edge and not. So that's what that emergency situational funding made a difference for a lot of people that were in that really precarious position. And just noting that the increasing cost of living creates those gaps. And following that, the Child Care Fund was able to meet the needs for families that were facing increased child care costs related to COVID, and or were looking to re-enter the workforce, and they were able to meet their costs that way.
Councilor Palmer has a question.
Yep.
Through the chair. So the Emergency Situational Fund, that $10,000. So these short-term needs due to COVID, you have medication, bus tickets, dental. For those that are on low income, those things are already covered, are they not? Through other provincial programs. And then the shelter, I'm just trying to understand how the shelter there was additional needs because of COVID. I'm just trying to understand that.
Some clarity, Taha?
Yeah, so we'll go through in order. Shelter could be for someone that needs to isolate from their household.
Okay.
That would be in that situation where they need support to be able to do that. The other costs would be only accessed if no other programs were meeting them already. The outreach team at Community Connections does collaborate with through and does administer all of those other programs. So for medication, for bus tickets, for dental, there are supports that are available, but when those are either not available in the timing or the criteria are not met exactly, there can be a lot of situations that are emergencies that don't actually get met. So that friction in the system can put someone in a really precarious situation. That's where this would have stepped in.
So I just want to just confirm clarity. So when we're talking about some of these things, low-income people may get access to that, but that doesn't mean that this emergency situation fund was totally dedicated to people on the lower spectrum of income. It could be anyone due to COVID that needed that and just fell between the cracks. Is that not correct?
They were, if they were accessing those services, it was because they were low income, and they also, like you said, fell through the cracks of other systems.
Okay, all right. Is that clear for you, Councillor?
Yeah, somewhat, Mayor Sulz, in some ways not. I'm not sure if we have the program with the bus tickets that we already provide that to Community Connections. Hopefully that program is continuing. And then the shelter, is there a breakdown of that, how that $10,000 was spent? So like the shelter, so if there was, I'm trying to guess what the situation was, but someone had COVID, so the family had to isolate in a hotel room or something. Do we have that kind of breakdown of that, how that money was spent?
We didn't require reporting on that funding, but it is available through Community Connections. That this was their summary of the breakdown, but the full breakdown is available. As far as bus tickets, those would be actually for those that were potentially leaving town to go to another shelter, not necessarily in town bus tickets.
Okay, that's helpful to understand. Thank you.
Any further comments? Seeing none, carry on, Taha, thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Allen now has a question.
Okay.
Todd, just on the childcare, I know the federal government had a big announcement on funding for childcare. A reduction of the cost. They're trying to get up to a Quebec standard, I guess, where it's very low cost to families. Is that reached us yet? Or is it reached our system, our network here?
Yeah, through the chair. That hasn't reached us yet. I believe all of the agreements between the federal and provincial governments are on the verge of being signed. There's probably one that was outstanding last I heard. But once those are all signed, then that funding will start to flow. It hasn't yet.
So on the childcare, do we have an excessive demand for the childcare resources in our town? So people are not getting childcare?
Definitely, that's a need that's existing that is probably one of the larger needs in the social sector is meeting that childcare demand. And I presented, it was quite a while ago to council about this, but there are so many factors that go into it. Sometimes it's the availability of space. Sometimes it's of licensed childcare workers. There's a lot of variables that affect that, and no magic bullet for it.
Ms. Braun?
I see Ingrid.
I could just jump in here and say that I know one of the issues they were grappling with at the Child Care Resource Center was that they had a severe shortage of skilled childcare workers. And for a while, they could only provide round-the-clock care to the children of essential workers during the height of different outbreaks. So, regular working families didn't necessarily, they weren't able to access childcare. And so this would help with those who needed to be able to go to work to put food on their table. But essential workers only were guaranteed childcare through the worst of it.
Thank you.
Well, I think in a previous presentation, just about the use of some of the restart funding, we suggested maybe going big and finding a way to address the big issues about childcare and big issues about finding an adequate place for people and making it to a high standard, best in the country. We had that general discussion, and I know a big plan was sort of suggested might be coming from the social services, but we haven't seen it yet. Is that still in the works?
Comments?
Yeah, that was the conversation that we had at the finance committee, and we'll cover that in a couple of slides here. So
Okay,
we'll get a chance to discuss for sure.
All right, let's carry on, thanks.
In terms of the phases of support that we had proposed on the front end of this COVID restart discussions, the second phase was support for those organizations that are being impacted, and noting that nonprofit organizations provide those support services in Revelstoke and stay open to serve the vulnerable populations. Additionally, that emergency grants were not available beyond the first outlay of funds, and that when we hear of businesses being impacted, that flow through also affects nonprofit organizations who have less flexible revenue models, and the only outcome is likely to be lowered service capacity. That's the flexibility is that they have, is to reduce the services and reduce the cost that way. So we know that staffing shortages, testing, and PPE over the Omicron wave have been an ongoing expense and result. That food bank demand has been heightened since March 2020, but that there's an additional rise in seasonal workers with part-time precarious work, and that's due to when businesses see their have shutdowns, that translates to workers not being at being employed and not bringing home their expected paycheck. And then the additional support that's available through this is actually that looking forward to grant funding in 2022, the relieving that pressure allows nonprofits to look towards new grant applications to secure additional funding, as well as actually match funding to be able to compound what they can get. So, being able to put grants towards saying we have $5,000 to do XYZ, that can be matched by another organization and turn into 10, 20. It can expand their reach that way. So that's any questions there, or we can move on to phase 3.
Any comments? Seeing none, carry on.
So phase 3 is that discussion that Rob had highlighted around social enterprises and building resiliency in the social sector. Before we move ahead with it, I think it's really important to note that the Social Development Committee did add considerations to this in a recent discussion, and the highlights of that are that organizations are at different levels of readiness for social enterprise. Some might still be dealing with these effects that we talked about previously, and really be the impact might be so great on them that they're not looking forward yet. Fatigue amongst the staff and the sector is prevalent for the same reasons. And addressing current needs is important to do before we look too far ahead. Given that, though, I think I had approached some nonprofits and discussed social enterprise, and the Indigenous Friendship Society was willing to share, their plan and as a way of highlighting what these possibilities are. The French Society has been working on a business plan, and that they're calling River. It's the Indigenous Values and Education Resources, and it's meant to provide educational consulting services for the community, and a warm and inviting retail workshop space. So this would be a dedicated space for the society, but also functioning as a way to educate the community, bring Indigenous art and culture to the community in a sustainable way that will, be bringing in revenue through sales of these services and products. So that's their vision, is to achieve their mission, but through generating revenue from a social enterprise. And that's all we can. That's all for now. We can discuss those aspects of phase 2 and 3, and I'll hand it back. Thank you.
Okay. Council, any questions for Tom at this point? Seeing none?
So the petition is for $200,000 of the restart money to go to this
Social sector.
social enterprise. And the only one we have right now is the Indigenous First Nations proposal. To me, that seems, maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's going to social service sector needs. And so distribution under the direction of the working group. So all of this fund would not be going to the one sector. This was just an example that you were showing. Is that correct, Tom?
That's correct. Yeah.
I can chime in here too. I think what we heard, the intention to look at long-term resiliency as a criteria for accessing the funds. The feedback we got from the social sector was that they are exhausted. Another new thing that they have to prepare for and plan on and develop business models around is exhausting when they're still finding with this latest wave that their short-term operational needs are not being met. So that's why we've kind of shifted the ability to prioritize where the needs are highest to the working group that would have representation on it from various members of the social development committee, including financial, perspectives and granting opportunities, matching opportunities. So I think that's covered in the last bullet point of the discussion notes in the council report, that we would work with this working group to assess the need. We've also been in discussions with the CBT, the Community Foundation, about ways that we can leverage what they're already doing or planning to do, and allocate funds through phase 2 initially to make sure the need is met, report back to council and the Social Development Committee, and then take a look at phase 3 as things hopefully ease up out there and there's opportunities to look at longer term resilient operational plans.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Elliott for any further comment, and I'm going to Councillor Ryan, Councillor Palmer. Any comment, Councillor Elliott, on your question?
No, I just think there are big things out there that we could address. I mean, there's social resilience and the social sector. There's been so much money thrown out to social provision by the federal and provincial governments. There's a surplus of cash in the population. There's putting money away. So what have we done? The people who are the entrepreneurs, the small businesses are the ones that are really paying the price. And we have an economic restart fund. To me, if you have a strong economy, everything else gets strong, and you can embrace everything else when you have the resources to do things from a solid platform. I think, to me, that's the key place to spend your money. If we've got money to jumpstart or support it, let's go after it.
Okay.
That's just
good. No, appreciate that comment. So I'm going to go to Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify the $200,000 is intended for phase 2 and phase 3. Basically, it's a question. It's like it's meant to be like we're assigning that number and then the working group decides how to allocate it. Is that right?
Ms. Braun?
That's correct. The working group would have representation from, as I mentioned, the social sector committee, as well as Tanya from Director of Finance, who to make sure that we follow along the criteria. And as well, we have representation from other granting agencies and input from the CBT, for instance. We pulled this working group together.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to comment or respond to Councillor Elliott's comments. Like, as somebody who sits on the Social Development Committee, it does not seem that there is a surplus. Like, there have been some grants available that they've taken advantage of because of course they're going to, but those were quickly used up because they had an increase in demand for their services. And so now they're still in this position where they can't meet their operating needs and they're really struggling. Like Ingrid was saying, or Ms. Braun was saying, like they are so exhausted, they're at their capacity, they are having the same challenges that small businesses are having, but they're serving the most vulnerable group of people.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the 200,000. So there is no specific work plan that details that 200,000. It's basically just a sum of money, and then we're sending that off to be used however they decide. Is that correct? Or
Ms. Braun, comment?
In the report, the third bullet point from the bottom of the discussion section talks about, if you recall, council approved policy F18, Safe Restart Community Grants policy that adheres to the criteria of the grant program. And then the working group that would form, that we've put together, would look at an amount and prioritize where the needs were highest with the different groups that are applying for it. We're trying to keep paperwork to minimum for these groups that are exhausted. And we are leveraging the expertise of members of our Social Development Committee and our Director of Finance to ensure that they are distributed in a transparent, accountable manner.
Can I answer your question, Council?
Not really. So I was looking at the policy. So this policy F18, has that been adopted? The link here doesn't show an adoption date on that. Has that policy been adopted?
Ms. Brown, any comment?
I believe so. Perhaps the Director of Finance could speak to that. Yeah, there she is.
Ms. McKay?
Through your worship, no, it has not been brought back to council for final approval at this point. It needed, it'll be coming soon.
Okay, Councilor Palmer.
Yeah, so the council, we have the fiscal responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility on sums of money. I with the lack of information, lack of work plan, I couldn't support it. The motion's not on the table right now, but and then it's based on a policy that we haven't even adopted, and so there's some things that are kind of backwards, and I can appreciate the exhaustion. Throwing money without any plan doesn't alleviate exhaustion. So those are just a couple of my comments as I'm seeing it right now. I'm trying to find the solutions, and there's been some really there's been some really good information there and some clarification, but I'm more confused as to how where this money is going. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
So I'm going to go to Councilor Ryan because she sits on Social Development Committee, and then I'm going to go to Councilor Charlotte because you had your hand up. So Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, to your point, Councilor Palmer, I think there's been hundreds of thousands of dollars of this money that's already been spent without a work plan, to be totally frank. Yeah. So we can't just pretend like that's not how we've been dealing with these funds. It hasn't been strategic. And this, of all of the funds, has had several rounds of engagement with different organizations that are so beyond their capacity. And it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation because they could use all of the money, right? Like if you were like, okay, here's $1 million, they would find a really good way to spend it. But without having this working group in place and without giving them the direction, it's been really challenging because you sit around this meeting and everyone's sitting there going like, I could use that money. You know what I mean? So they're kind of trying to gauge what is council willing to part with, and then how can we best meet the needs, not just in the short term, but then we put some away for those longer term needs so that it's not just like, it's a one-time sum of money that then next year they don't have. It's like, if that's what the working group, let's say it's 300, 400,000, then the working group would maybe they'll decide that half of it should go away to future COVID things that we haven't seen yet, right? So that's the whole purpose of like giving them this direction, is that they're the experts in deciding where is the highest priority.
So through the mayor, thank you, Councillor Ryan. I agree with much, like probably 95% of what you said there, and that this is my concern about the ad hoc approach, not only to the expenditures, but also the ad hoc approach to this working group that's inconsistent with the community charter and our responsibilities as council. And I have stated publicly many times, and I'll state it again, at the very minimum, there should be a council representative on the COVID recovery task force. Now, I'm pleased.
So just so you're aware, that was, I had asked for staff to sit on there. That staff member is no longer there, so I'm back sitting on that recovery task force.
And so without getting kind of into the detailed legislation, I think it's a broken system. It's not a decision that council has made. I'm pleased that our CAO is going to be doing a committee review And this would be, I think, falling under that. Councillor Ryan, I absolutely agree with you that, it has been just this sort of chaotic approach of just money going out. It's large sums of money. And we, I think, are failing our responsibility, including in the report here, the 80,000 that we approved after the expenditures. This way, the way we did last year, questionable on process, basically approving expenditures after they've already been made. And now we're just a blank check. And so that I really think that council should have and staff, maybe a committee of whole saying, and possibly the COVID recovery task force saying, what are we doing here? Because it's just everywhere, and that it seems to lack really proper oversight and responsibility.
Okay, Councillor Wine, I'll let you respond, and then Councillor Shabbat.
Yeah, I agree that there, like, some strategy or sort of like a more general focus and look at the whole thing is definitely warranted. I think that's a great idea. I think the issue here is because it's been being spent on, masks and whatever, and I mean that in a sarcastic tone, then there is some, like, it hasn't been explicitly said, but there is a sentiment among the social development committee that's like, okay, well, is any of this going to come towards us because, like, we're drowning here, right? And so if we don't assign some of it, I think, like, that's the intent behind this, is that we don't just spend it on a new speaker system. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is real need in the community, and we're not necessarily being explicit with what they can expect. So it's really difficult for them to plan around a big question mark.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Councillor Shalette and Councillor Burchell.
Thank you, Worship. I'm surprised to find that we have not adopted F18. To be honest, in the report, I think it mentioned it was talking about F18 as an adopted policy or approved by council. So thank you for catching that it wasn't actually adopted yet, because that does seem like that was where the meat was,
Right.
to give some clarity on what these funds could be used for. So that it wasn't just blank check. It was to those specified social needs that Councillor Ryan is speaking to, that we know our social sector is hurting. These funds are intended to help support the community, and this helps support parts of our community that might otherwise slip through those cracks that we were talking about. I'm supportive of this funding being allocated to the social sector. I agree. I think there's quite a bit of funding available. We're using a lot of it for municipal operations. But to me, this does not seem like a large ticket item in this context. This doesn't seem like a ton of money. To Councillor Palmer's concerns around the oversight of it, I think that potentially there's room for a bit more clarity in that F18 policy to say what these funds are to be used for. But beyond that, I wouldn't want to get too far into what is almost an operational question, where council, I don't think, needs to vet the merits of any one project, that if the project fits the required needs as detailed in F18, then it should be up to that steering committee to be able to, or that working group to be able to move forward. I'd be comfortable with that. Seeing the definitions around the working group and how that's being formed. Ms. Braun had mentioned some of the different groups and the stakeholders that are involved in that. I'm wondering if there's a terms of reference that we can refer to just to see on paper what that looks like and what is being covered in their calls to action.
Ms. Braun, you have your hand up. Response?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, through your worship, speak to a couple of the questions that were raised. First of all, in terms of accountability or transparency, we have brought these proposals forward, as Taha mentioned, through the Social Development Committee, which is what was directed, that we were directed to do. Originally, I believe it was Councillor Ryan who raised the issue of accessing restart funds for the social sector. It's been back to the Social Development Committee 3 times. It's been to the Finance Committee in a pretty robust discussion about how we would apply policy in terms of reference. And my understanding was that it was going to go back to this working group who would be the best situationed to provide input into how effective the policy will be in supporting these groups. So I understand the policy is close to being approved, but we wanted to have eyes on it from the working group. And to clarify Councillor Palmer's comments, the working group is a working group of the Social Development Committee specific to accessing restart funds. That was not a Recovery Task Force. Recovery Task Force was, overall making recommendations that this be brought forward, but it was Council's direction that the Social Development Committee direct how restart funds were allocated to the social service sector, and therefore the working group would be a working group of that committee of council.
Thank you. Councillor Burksville and Councillor Ryan.
So I support the motion that a minimum of 200,000 in restart funding be allocated to the social service sector. I do appreciate Councillor Palmer's concerns about the lack of council oversight. I can't think of another example where we just say, oh, here's a lump sum of money, and now get to it, and then later on tell us how you spent it. I was just thinking about the RMI funding, and essentially in the past we say, okay, there's a pot of money of $500,000. People, this is the broad outline of who can apply, and then the one difference being that once the committee's chosen the different projects, these ones fit the criteria, this is how we're going to allocate the money and balance it between the different projects. Then it comes to council to be approved before the money's actually given out. So
Ms. Braun has her hand up again, so
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I didn't, but I can't speak to that. Certainly with the RMI committee, it's a bit of a mixed bag process. Yes, the committee forms the overall strategy, which outlines where the funds can flow. It does come back to council for approval, subject to procurement policy of the city. So there are amounts that we can go ahead and approve that are within, for instance, our spending limits as per our department head.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ryan and Councillor Palmer.
So the way that I thought this would, based on the report, and correct me if I'm wrong in this interpretation, but that once if council approves an amount that would be allocated, then this working group would come together, put together a proposal, and that council would get a chance to look at that before the funds actually got spent. Is that correct?
Ms. Braun.
I would defer to Director McCabe, but yes, that was one option. I think there might be an ability if there's small amounts for immediate relief that could be granted, but certainly the plan was to report back to council once the working group has had a crack at reviewing the policy, and that would include Director McCabe, and looking at what other communities have been doing. We can give you that information as well. That was brought to the Finance Committee, and there was a good discussion on that, but I'll defer to Tanya.
Ms. McCabe.
Thanks, through your worship. Yeah, that was the intent, I believe, for the larger amounts for sure, for it to come back to council for approval, kind of similar to what CBT funds are done.
Yes.
So same kind of process.
Yeah, so if that's the case, then it's still going to get, you're like a chance for council to have their input. It's not as if it's a blank check, right? You're still going to say, okay, no, that given this scope, we don't feel that this is an appropriate amount, or that we would like to allocate more to it. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say it's a blank check. And I don't know, I think it says in this report that the recommendation of a minimum of 200,000, but I would be interested in increasing it, and just with the caveat that if there's a proposal that comes back and certain parts of it are not components that council's interested in, that we just scrap that component, but still allow them to provide that immediate relief.
Okay, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So good discussion here. So I think we're getting some clarity of the need of ratification at the very minimum by council. That is not ingrained here, and if that's the intent, it certainly wasn't clear to me before that being stated just now. That would be very helpful, when this motion is to make sure there's clarity that there is ratification. There needs to be some boundaries around that too. So you say the small amounts. It seems that Councillor Chalette thinks $200,000 is a small amount. quite disagree with that, but I think a response that's in my mind, in my dollars, that's huge. And even the small, what I would call small in the hundreds, should be responsible, because hundreds add up to thousands anyway. So I hope that this motion is tightened up. I also don't think we should be doing this until the terms of reference is solidified. But getting that boundary on that, making sure that it does come back to council for ratification is super important.
Okay. All right, Councillor, Councillor.
I think when we made the recommendation that the social committee review this and come back with funding requests, I think it was made clear, think big. Let's find a solution or a use of the money that would benefit us to the future. Charity or any giving funds to give to operations makes no sense. What are we thinking the future? It's like giving someone a loaf of bread instead of how to grow a field. Let's grow the field. Let's put our money into something that can amplify or secure a future rather than just feed us today.
Okay, good comment. So, Councillor Ryan, did you have anything?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go to Councillor Shuley.
Yeah, I think when I was suggesting the council review component, that's for amounts that are, like you were saying, those bigger, longer term, phase 3 type amplifier type projects. Those are the ones where, they're gonna be very expensive and potentially one lump sum amount. And I do agree that council should have input, but for that 200 that's being proposed in the report right now, like this is the money that is already been identified as a need. It needs to go out the door, and I don't think it makes sense for council to be so stringent, because the working group are, like, this is made up of literal community heroes, you know what I mean? Like, these are the people that you would entrust with anything community related. And I agree with you, Nicole, it's not a huge amount, especially given the entire amount that we received from the federal government. This is a small amount. And I do think that we should be giving it to that flexibility to the people who know the needs the best. So what I would propose is that this 200 minimum that is suggested be like that the motion in front of us get passed, but that another 200 be considered that would come back to council, that would be for larger long-term projects, exactly like you said. That's no commitment in terms of saying yes until we've seen the proposal, but that it's at least earmarked so that it doesn't get spent on something stupid.
Okay, thanks for that comment, Councillor Shillette.
My only concern with what you're proposing, with what Councillor Elliott is talking about, these bigger programs is from what it sounds like is more encapsulated in the phase 3 concept of the restart funds for the social service sector. What I'm hearing from Councillor Ryan, and which doesn't surprise me, is that our social sector providers are drowning right now. They are floundering, they need support, they need to get through day to day. And as much as it's great to talk about future projects and loftier ideas and how do we fix the bigger problems, we have to make sure the lights go on first and keep that base level capacity supported, because I don't necessarily think that putting more money at the solution when it comes to big projects like that, it's not about the lack of funds or money, it's the lack of human capacity to operate and to bring on a project like that above and beyond the day-to-day, which right now is just overwhelming everyone. And just as much as it is in small businesses, where we're just trying to keep going day by day, to take that step back and do those big picture planning, you need to know that the rent's going to be paid. So if we put this funding in place and we provide that support for the day-to-days to help bridge these gaps of the funding cycles, that's when our heroes and the people that are doing this work will be able to come up with those bigger ideas for a later phase 3 recovery or resiliency time, where we can come up with some really creative made in Revelstoke solutions. I think there's already some projects in the go. Then ideas, I think the strategy documents that we're working on right now are going to come into play big time on that. So when we're looking at the food security strategy, for example, is getting a revamp this year. as per the last document that was done in 2014. So looking at how far we've come, where are we going next? What's our next goal? So the more strategy documents like that we can get in place so we know what we need, like the housing needs assessment, for example, is a great project that hopefully we'll be able to move forward and know where we should be investing this time and money.
Great. All right, Councillor, one last comment.
We received $1.7 million in funding from the federal government to put into restarting our economy. Right? We're down to $600,000. So you tell me how much, I don't know where the money's gone, but it could be frittered away on many different projects. So
This to me is not frittering away.
No, well, we've gone from $1 million of it in projects that just.
I don't think it was for restarting the economy, it was for restarting the
recovery. So
the
I can, well, maybe the definition that needs to be looked at, what the purpose of the money was for.
Okay, so we've all given our opinion on a motion that we haven't even put on the table yet. So I'm going to ask if there's someone who wants to put this motion on the table. You have a comment before that, Councillor Burksell?
I was gonna put it on the table, but with a small caveat
Let's
that
hear it.
I'll just highlight. So that a recommendation from the Recovery Task Force that a minimum of $200,000 in restart funding be allocated to social service sector needs for distribution under the direction of the working group and Director of Finance be approved subject to council approval.
So,
I'll second
is
it
that,
for discussion.
you're going to second it for discussion?
Should I keep going with the and that? I'm not gonna, that was my change. I was just.
Okay.
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, let's go and that. So it's all one.
And that the working group report back to the Recovery Task Force and Council regarding the distribution of restart funds and the extent to which the needs of the sector have been met.
Okay, so you're seconding, Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, just for discussion.
All right.
I think that the council component is really only necessary and really warranted when it comes to the more creative projects where there might be some, input from the community in terms of like, do we really think that's a good use? But straight up, the 200,000 is an immediate need that has been identified, and that money needs to get out the door. And I don't think it should be in any way council, like it's not our place to get in the way of the working group that already understands and is intimately dealing with these problems day to day. So I would think if that is the recommendation, that the amount be doubled, but that half of that be council dependent on the proposal and half of that be what is in front of us as this recommendation. And then that way we can see maybe some more creative solutions and a work plan for that other half of it. But that, we're not just leaving these organizations without funding when they need it right now.
Okay, so I just want to remind you both that the word minimum is in there, a minimum of $200,000, not a maximum, a minimum. So you're basically saying that if the working group or our staff say we have an amount of X dollars, whatever that is, whether it's 200,000, 400,000, whatever, minimum. And then basically you're stating, Councillor Brooks Hill, that they come up, the working group comes up with something, it comes back to council to have a sober second look at that to see if they feel it's warranted. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna, before I go to any other councillors, I'm gonna ask staff for comment on that. And I'm asking for comment about delay in getting that money out the door. So that's basically, I know I'm putting you guys on the spot, but I'm asking you, is that gonna delay the ability to get the boots on the ground doing the work that needs to be done in the community? So Ms. Braun, I'll put you on the spot. You're on first.
Thank you. And I'm going to refer to Tanya as well, but the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting, which I understand have been approved, but have not been seen by council yet, and Tanya can correct me on that. at that, Finance Committee was directed by this group here to review the draft policy and to come back with a recommendation. So this is the recommendation we're coming back with. Initially, we had been looking for $80,000. That was back in October. Now the need is much greater. We're looking for $200,000 for phase 2, because that is what we heard from the social sector, the $80,000 for phase 2, and the rest of it going towards long-term strategies isn't doable for them right now. They are exhausted and at their wits' end. So we have increased the ask to $200,000 pending the review of the policy by the Finance Committee, which is being completed. So I guess in answer to your question, and Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, we would like the ability to distribute those funds under the direction of the Director of Finance and other members of the working group of the Social Development Committee, subject to our spending limits for that phase 2 spending, which would be, other communities like Nelson, for instance, it's $10,000 or $20,000, depending on the need. But we believe that the working group of the Social Development Committee, with Tanya to keep an eye on the criteria, is the best group to allocate and decide on that distribution.
Great, thanks. Ms. McCabe, comment?
Through your worship, yes, that's Ingrid's correct. The policy was sent to the Finance Committee. That meeting was at the end of November. At the last Finance Committee meeting, which was the first one since that meeting it was reviewed at, those minutes were approved, so they will come forward to council now, and so the policy can come back to council for approval. That's what the Finance Committee recommended to council. And yes, the oversight of the actual amounts and where they go to make sure that they're in line with the letter and the criteria that was set out by the province. I've definitely been quite stringent with that, and so the funds were provided to the city, to all municipalities by the province, for the intention of helping the municipalities deal with the financial impacts of COVID on the city's operations. But they did put in there a little caveat that allowed us to then also distribute the funds out to help those that are vulnerable in the community on top of that. So that's what we're using to be able to do this. Otherwise, the rest of the funds are supposed to be directed towards helping the city deal with the financial impacts on the city operations of COVID.
Great, thank you for the clarification on that.
You're welcome.
So, getting back to my question, so basically the motion on the table is to include council in one last kick at the cap before the money is distributed. Are we causing excess anxiety for people to receive this money? I want your opinion.
To your worship, yes, we are. They have been looking, to council to distribute these interim funds, these operational shortfall funds, since September, October, when he first brought it to council, and things have only gotten worse with the Omicron virus. So yes, they are in dire need.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that comment. So now I have, Councillor, you have moved that motion. Any thoughts or change on that motion? Or are you comfortable with the motion going to the table to be voted on the way it is?
I'll amend it to the original as in the package if my seconder agrees.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so first and seconder, we go back to the original motion without council input to distribute these funds. Is that correct? All right, any further comment from councillors? So I'm going to go to Councillor Palmer and Councillor Elliott, who's just about fuming and coming out of his chair. Councillor Palmer.
I should let Councillor Elliott go first, but I'll go. So what I'm hearing in this most recent sort of dialogue is that there's an urgent need to get money out for some urgent needs. And I'm missing something. So we're gonna go spend $200,000. I don't see the spreadsheet on where is this money going? The $200,000. What's the breakdown of this money? Where is it going?
To all of the social sectors that support every single person in the community in one way or another.
So, Mayor Sulz, what my concern is actually we're going to be hurting people through irresponsible, because if we can't have a really basic breakdown of where this money is going, it's just going out the door. Like,
can you give us a breakdown of the existing money that's been spent? Because I can't.
Just what I was about to say.
So before we get into an argument going back and forth, I'm going to go back to you were speaking.
Yes, thank you. And that's my point was building on that is not just this 200,000, but the money that Councillor Elliott adeptly mentioned, that we've spent a whole bunch of money, and all we know, I saw one of our masks on the ground on the walk here. Where did this money just disappear? And I care about the social sector, but we're just throwing this money out without any sense of any kind of accountability, saying it's urgent, people are stressed, but it's just going out. There's no accountability, there's no breakdown. And then we're going to say, okay, we're just going to throw it out without any council accountability. And I think I've made my point.
Great, thank you, Councilor Palmer. Now, Councilor Elliott, I know you were. And the reason I did that was because I want to hear from you without the emotion. And so now that you've calmed a little bit, let's hear what you have to say.
Exactly what Tim said. You can say we need $200,000 to survive, but carte blanche here, $200,000 spent. Would you do this for your own money? I doubt it. You can certainly want a spreadsheet and accounting for it, and yeah, let's support it where it's necessary. But maybe the real issue is that the municipality is now supporting the social services. Is this a provincial thing, or was the province's intent of they're granting us the money to put it into social services?
No, their intent of granting us the money was for our use.
Yes.
The corporation of the city of Revelstoke, to make sure that our needs were met, with a caveat saying, if you have extra money, or if you want to spend it in another way in the community based on legislation, you can do that. Is that not correct, Ms. Braun and Ms. McCabe?
Your worship, yes. That was, as I understand the direction, that's what other communities have done. They have already moved forward with this activity in the previous 6 months. They have allocated funds to community groups, in amounts. We've looked at best practices. We've brought that to the finance committee. They've reviewed the best practices. They reviewed our policy. Everything seems like it aligns with what other communities have done and adheres to the transparency required by the criteria. There is accountability. There is a subgroup of the Social Development Committee with council representation, as well as Director of Finance, that are the ones that are supposed to be ultimately ensuring that accountability. That's where I answered your question.
Okay, good. That does answer my question. All right, so I'm going to go back. Councilor Ryan, you'd like to make a comment?
Yeah, just to Councilor Palmer's point, I disagree that there's no accountability. There's no spreadsheet telling you exactly where every single dollar is being spent, but there's several people who I have witnessed in social development committee meetings who are saying hello, are we gonna be able to access this because we're struggling here? And that's been happening for several months, and the whole purpose of the working group is so that there is accountability and saying, we're not just saying, all right, here it is, go spend it. It's we're giving it to the people who completely understand the community in its most boots on the ground possible way, and they're going to prioritize where the money gets spent. I don't think that's not accountability. I think that's entrusting the organizations that support the most vulnerable people in our community with just a little bit of the money that we were given for literally doing nothing.
Okay, Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Councilor Ryan, I really don't have the objection to spending the money where it's appropriate, and if that's in the social service sector. And I don't disagree with you that the way we spent all this other money, I would suggest irresponsibly, because there hasn't been accountability. So what I'm grasping on and saying, give me even one example of, okay, where's a 10,000, what is this immediate? I'm hearing boots on the ground. So are we hiring more people? Is that what we're doing with the 200,000? I'm at a loss, but Mayor Sulz, I think I made my point.
Plenty. All right, thank you. So I'm going to call a question on this. I'm supportive of this money, but I actually feel that we as council need to see where the 1.6 or 1.7 million dollars of money went to. That can come through finance committee, can come to, and then come to council, that sort of thing. I would like to see, so Taha, Ms. Braun, the social sector, is that those people who are utilizing these funds, where they're going to, how they're being used, that sort of thing, trusting in the fact that, you know, I've heard what council has said, I've heard their concerns. And then Ms. McKay, this policy that hasn't been ratified by council, I would like to see that come to council at the next council meeting or the one right after that. We need to deal with those things. So as Councilor Palmer, if we haven't ratified that, we thought we did and we haven't, and please bring that to us so that we can get that policy dealt with and go from there. So I think all of council have weighed in. They've made their comment. The motion is on the table. I am now going to ask the question. So all those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councilor Palmer and Councilor Elliott are opposed. This motion is passed. Thank you. All right, so we are going to go on to Development Services. Councilor Brooks Hill, are you asking for a brief recess? So our staff has now said to me, they've asked me to make a motion for a recess because then they'll put something on the computer that all of the people watching will know that. So if you want to make that motion, seconded by Councilor Charlotte, all in favor, we're going into recess. Thank you, Ms. Russo. You can do what you need to do with the notification. Thank you. There we go. It's right up in front of us already. Thank you for that.
Unmuted.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rousseau. We are back now. I'd like to go on to 11B, Development Services. Mr. Simon, do you want to make a comment or a bit of a presentation before I put motions on the table?
Through your worship, no formal presentation, just really give a high-level overview for council, though. The main intent of this report is just to come back to council, come back to the community to showcase the findings of the initial engagement that was completed for work on the Grizzly Plaza revitalization project, and then to get some support from council for next steps to ultimately pursue this project. So yeah, pretty high level, but we wanted to make sure that it was brought back for council consideration and to report back to the public as well.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. So Councillor Palmer, you want to put the first motion on?
Yeah, that Grizzly Plaza survey report written by P. Simon, senior planner dated January 25th, 2022 be received for information.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Charlotte.
Just a quick comment, Your Worship, I'm just trying to pull up the right spot in the report. There was one part of the conversation about the public art and the statue that has been proposed of Isabelle Corsier. And the recommendation number 7, it says recommend the Public Art Committee further engage with the community around the proposal to install a sculpture of Isabelle Corsier in Grizzly Plaza. And the conversation that I remember having at the committee was more around the idea that the Isabelle Corsier statue in that project is a separate entity from what the Grizzly Plaza revitalizing conversation is. And I just want to make sure that those two conversations are separated. I'd sent a little bit more information to council and to our CAO, and I think we're going to work on a motion for the next council meeting to make sure we get the right letter of support for that grants application to get that statue on the works.
Okay, good, and that makes sense. And so what we've seen also in the report is either it be moved somewhere else or it be separated. And so and that's from the comments from the public. I want to make that clear. So so basically we're receiving this report from information. So any other comments from Councillor Palmer?
Thank you. A question to the planner, and it's just to help in the formulation of our understanding the next motion. The steering committee, I'm going to make the bold assumption that this will be a select committee of council. But who do you envision being on this committee? Has there been any dialogue in the background as to who might actually be on this committee?
Through your worship, not anything specific at this point. I imagine some of the community members that are involved in various boards and committees of council already would potentially be engaged, but the terms of reference would be established that would be brought back to council to go over the formulation roles and responsibilities of that steering committee. So there will be an opportunity for further dialogue on that.
Yeah, we'll follow up, Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing the follow-up motion after this, but I'm satisfied with that.
Okay, good. All right. Any other comments on the motion on the table, Councillor Charlotte?
Kind of further to Councillor Palmer's comment and around the steering committee and who's going to be on that and what that looks like and what the next steps look like. This one actually kind of steers me in the same direction that Councillor Elliott was going in the last discussion, where I'm nervous about doing small little projects ad hoc. What is our strategy? And having just sat through the opening meeting with the steering committee for the food security strategy, it really shows me what can happen when we have a clear strategy that aligns with our values as council, that clearly states this is where we want to go with this. And to me, Grizzly Plaza is, and I think we saw that loud and clear in the comments, is it is a hub of the community. This is one of our community spaces and places that we feel very attached to, that has a physical manifestation of our heritage and the background of our community, and that gets people engaged. I think that we haven't been very clear about what are our cultural values, what is our cultural strategy, what is our public spaces strategy. I don't know where that fits, but I would like to see that turned into a strategy in a similar layout that the food security strategy has been done, with what are our current, what's the current status of our resources? What is the current status of our providers? So in this case, artists and musicians, and the farmers markets, and all the things that make our community, this community place where you want to go downtown and spend time in Grizzly Plaza. I recognize, though, that this has come from a specific grant that is tied to that particular project. So whether now is the time, or somehow we set it up so that we can have a cultural strategy at some point for this community, so that when we're making these decisions, we can look to the research and the engagement. This is what our community wants. It fits, off we go, rather than having to have these discussions every time.
Good, and a good point. And so I had said privately to staff after this had come out that they went after the money. I said, my whole fear with these one-offs is just because there's money doesn't mean that we need to chase it. And we need to have a strategy. What are we going to do as a community? We talked about the downtown core. My building has been in the downtown core since 1925. I have now paid for Grizzly Plaza 3 times in the last 30 years in different renditions and work that's been done. And so I look at this sort of thing and say, just because one group says, hey, there's a grant, we should go after it, doesn't mean that we're chasing money without an overarching plan. And so we keep talking about some of the master plans, Parks and Rec master plans, whatever. So now that we've heard from the community, and thank God that our staff was able to go out and engage to the community and hear from our community, and the community has said, whoa, 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 whoa. We are not going to allow you to put a woodshed downtown just because you want musicians to come from it, sound to come from it. We're basically saying we like what we've got. There's ways now in this one-off to enhance what we already have in a way that works for the entire community. So going back to what Councillor Palmer had said and what you had said, Councillor Shalat, dealing with the steering committee and working with our staff to make sure that the values of the community are being heard. That doesn't mean that all of us need to sit on a steering committee, but one or two of you could sit on that steering committee along with the professionals in the community that brought this project forward to start with. And to put the values of the community first, and then the values of what you're hearing. You're here to represent the community as a whole to go forward. So I'm supportive of that sort of thing. However, I do believe that, as you guys have said many times before, having an overarching plan to our community is the best way that we move things forward for the benefit of all. And it goes back to squirrel. Oh, we're going after this, and then we're off chasing that. And then, oh, there's a black squirrel, we're going in that direction. And so, you know, I make fun of those sorts of things, but that's how my wife says sometimes my mind goes, and I'm off on that tangent. But really, we need to have a plan that works for everyone so that the community knows that just because somebody's coming up with an opinion doesn't mean that our whole downtown core art community is going to be changed. There's going to be conversation, there's going to be engagement. So is there any comment from any of you regarding that thought process, or should we stop? We're going to receive this for information, and then Councillor Palmer wants to carry on with another motion. Okay, so Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so question to Councillor Charlotte and other councillors. This select committee of council, maybe it's called the Grizzly Plaza Enhancement Committee. Would you want to be on that committee? I'm suggesting 2 councillors. It's such a central part to our community. Would you want to serve on a committee like that? Since you have so much time.
Isn't that the question?
Touche.
So think about that anyway.
Yeah, because we're going to do this motion first, and then you're going to quickly go into that motion. So the motion on the table is to receive the report for information. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now we're going to carry on to, do you want to do something, or do you want to put the next steps, revitalization project, put that on, and then we talk about steering committee? Councilor Palmer.
I was prepared to put a motion, something like that. A select committee of council called the Grizzly Plaza Enhancement Committee be established to review and advise on project throughout 2022 to discuss guiding principles and engagement to develop a concept of refurbishment of the Grizzly Plaza.
You repeat that?
Yes, I think I can.
Because he only added a couple words to what's there.
So I'll put the motion on the table.
Okay.
That a select committee of council called the Grizzly Plaza Enhancement Committee be established to review and advise on the Grizzly Plaza project. I'm going to refine it a little bit. To review, design guiding principles and engagement plan to develop a concept for the Grizzly Plaza.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for a seconder of the motion, and I'm actually, maybe I'll just ask for clarification. So just councilors on here, or is there going to be someone else sitting on there? Councilor Palmer, just for clarification.
Yeah.
Ms. Floyd is now on my screen here, so I think she's asking the same question. Is that correct, Ms. Floyd?
Well, I also just have a quick question. Councillor Palmer, the second time you reread the resolution, it didn't have a 2022 end date in it. Can we assume you still want to have it just for a specific period of time?
Yeah, so that throughout 2022, I could either leave that in, which you're correct. I had that in the first time I read it, and then I struck it out the second time. I'm fine leaving it in there, and then it does indicate that there is a sunset clause within the motion, so I'm good with that. I can speak more to the terms of reference if there's a seconder to the motion.
Okay, so is there a seconder to that motion? So Councilor Charlotte. Now, Councilor Palmer, I'm going to go back to you for terms of reference regarding who would sit on the committee. Thank you.
So I just, I think it's a discussion item, but I think it's important to have community members on there, and there's a selection, and I'm not sure who all those people, but there's been different perspectives, and I think that's bringing together different people is important, and I would like to see representation, not too big of a committee, but some representation of the arts community, some of the other components. I would ideally like to see 2 council members. There has to be at least 1 council member as a select committee of council.
Okay, Councilor Sherwood.
For that, I would be willing to sit on that committee because I know I do have a lot of background with that area and what's happened in my time in Revelstoke, at least with Grizzly Plaza. My recommendation would be that there should be, and this would be by no means exhaustive, but I agree with Councillor Palmer, community members, stakeholder groups. There's a lot of different user groups that use Grizzly Plaza for various different reasons. So having a representation from the farmers market there, having representation from the downtown businesses there, having representation from food truck vendors that have struggled to operate there because of electricity issues and accessibility. Having someone from, there's a few other thoughts. Anyways, I think there's a broad, diverse opportunity there to make sure that Grizzly Plaza does work for all of the user groups that use it, because to make a great community place, it's the programming that really makes it sing. And if we can use this grant funding and this opportunity to revitalize the plaza in a way that works better for each of those user groups, I think we'll have a win to walk away from. And from that conversation, the start of what does a cultural strategy look like? What do we want our community places and spaces to look like? And have some natural next steps flowing from that.
Okay, so Councillor Charlotte, you'll sit on this. Councillor Palmer, do you want to sit on this as well?
I'm willing to. I'm also willing to let other councillors.
Any other councillors feel that this is a project that they'd like to sit on? Seeing none, Councillor Palmer.
So it's just a
Go ahead.
quick question. So rather than revise it, could we just say add to, which the to create a steering committee inclusive of 2 councillors? Would it be?
Well, we've already got the motion
Oh,
on.
I know, I said we're going through a revision.
So I'm going to ask you this, Councillor Palmer, can we ask Ms. Donato to work with you guys to come up with a committee, because Parks and Rec and that sort of thing is her bailiwick. And so, Ms. Donato, can I ask you that question? Is that something that you would be able to work with these 2 councillors or 2 councillors to come up with a committee, steering committee? Is that something that is, I'll shut up and just let you know.
Your worship, yes, we can absolutely do that.
All right. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So, yeah, was thinking about that. So there's the motion of establishing this committee. We're going to be proposing another motion after, if this passes, that Councillor Shirlette and Councillor Palmer work with the Director of Recreation to propose terms of reference for council consideration.
Okay, so let's vote on the motion that's on the table to create the steering committee. We're going to have 2 councillors on that steering committee. Is that correct? All right. All those in favor? Motion's carried. So your other motion before I go on to the other ones that are in the report.
That Councillor Shirlette and Councillor Palmer work with the Director of
Parks
and Recreation to establish terms of reference for Grizzly Plaza Enhancement Committee.
All right, second for that motion, Councillor Shirlette. Any further discussion on that motion? Does that work for you, Ms. Donato?
Yes, your worship, that'd be fine.
All right, good. All right, Councillor Palmer, you have another comment?
Just anticipating there might be questions about B, C, and D, but I think that's what Nicole and I would work on, is that establishing those within the terms of reference, and then we can just move on.
Okay.
This is what I'm suggesting.
All right, good. And any other comments from councillors? Councillor Elton, did you have any comment?
Can you start another committee for the compensation review? For council, I don't know.
That's how it works. We'll talk about that after. Okay, let's now call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, let's go to B, C, and D. So someone want to put that, finalize a design report? Councillor Palmer.
So I would like to not put any more of this in, that Councillor Charlotte and I can actually take a look and see how this gets integrated into the terms of reference. I don't know that any further dialogue is really needed, so that this is basically the mandate of that committee.
Perfect, good. And you're all, councillors, you're all comfortable with that? All right, let's end it there. And then you can organize yourselves with Ms. Donato and then start getting to work on that. All right, let's move on to item 11C, Development Services. Mr. Simon, do you have any comments prior to us putting this motion on the table?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so this is somewhat of a unique request. I don't think anyone on council would have seen something like this. So under the Real Estate Development and Marketing Act, the ownership change that the owners are requesting here actually does require approval from City Council. Hence why this application is ultimately before you today. They are looking to convert an existing portion of the site. You can see how the KOA campground is actually severed into 2 lots, and that southern lot is what they're looking at converting to this shared interest model that would essentially just allow individuals to be able to purchase an interest in the property, which would then have their they would have their own little portion of the site to be used. So if you guys have any questions, I'm definitely happy to answer them. The report kind of looks at, what the implications associated with this are and what the proposed benefits from the applicant's perspective are. So if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
All right, so Mr. Palmer, I'll let you go first, then I want to weigh in. Go ahead, Councilor.
Okay, so I do have a motion, see if anybody seconds it. So I move that the report from the senior planner regarding 2437 KOA Road be received and that it be referred to the March committee of the whole meeting. And I'll speak to the motion if I get a second.
Okay. There's a second for that motion that takes it off the table today, puts it in the committee of the whole to have a robust discussion.
So
Councilor Elliott, you're going to second it?
just to hear the dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in no way in a position to make this decision at this time. It's very unique. Co-ops, I think, were kind of trendy back in the 1970s and 1980s. Some of them were quite successful, others less so. The idea of a co-op in campgrounds, the only ones that I can think of are disasters. They were in the States, because essentially what you have is this marginal housing program that comes in. I see a lot of problems potentially. There might be some good stuff, but I think we need to really think about the implications. Furthermore, we haven't finished the OCP review of that area. And you know, I'm concerned that it might become like a messy, tiny, you know, trailers going in and out kind of thing. For sure, there's probably, you know, some pretty high profit for the owners there that may come at the expense of the city tax base. But I'm just not in a place to you know, having received this report on Friday, I'm just not in a place that I could make any rational decision on this.
Yeah, appreciate that, Councillor, and appreciate the motion. I'm going to support your motion going to committee of the whole. I feel the same thing, but I do actually want to weigh in. I have some opinions. My opinion's a little concerning regarding this ownership model. We lose control over what could happen in the future. There could be you know, upwards of 75 or 100 different owners in this business model. Works for them, and then with all due respect to what their rules and regulations may be, it could end up being a shanty town type of or go to that down the road sort of thing. But it also takes it away from the public. So our public will only be able to access half of that campground, come and go, tourism, that sort of thing. And I actually have seen the decline of a community 60 kilometers, 65 kilometers west of us, where they had a robust number of campgrounds. And those campgrounds were then sold off for condos. And the community actually went into a tailspin. That community is sickened. And I look at that and go, okay, I'm a little leery about taking away the ability of public to come into our community to camp. So we've seen a change in one of the other campgrounds where they've gone high scale. They still have a great number of camping spaces and great places for those who don't have an RV to stay. And that's a whole different model. But here is basically you buy your place, you know, you can go here, you know, borrow my place and you can park your camper, put your tent, that sort of thing. But there's no guarantee that the public, after these are sold off, will have access to camping other than a portion. So I have a concern about that. And because it's not a tried and true method, you know, it is under the Real Estate Development Marketing Act. It's there. However, having said what I've said, I just wanted to give you that information from my opinion. The robust discussion needs to be at committee of the whole, and the motion on the table is for that. So I'm going to ask, is there any other councillors that want to briefly weigh in, and then we'll go to asking that question. Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, just a question. In the report, it mentions that the owners would have their own bylaws and regulations to guide development to restrict permanent occupancy. but what would the city's responsibility be in enforcing those if they weren't being upheld?
Councillor, Mr. Sullivan.
Through your worship, so the city wouldn't be responsible for enforcing a private owner's own bylaws that they have to regulate users at the site. The city would be responsible for enforcing any of our bylaws. So if there was ever any nuisance, if there was ever any non-conformity with the city's zoning regulations, then that would be a matter of enforcement action for the city.
Gotcha. So that's kind of, I guess, what the mayor was maybe alluding to. If things went sideways, then there would potentially be some resourcing from the city standpoint.
So our CAO is just giving me clarification because this motion is on the table to be referred to another meeting. There's debate, so my apologies for weighing in and starting the process. So I would like to call the question to refer this to committee of the whole. So all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Thank you, Councillor Elliott. That will be go to our committee of the whole. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate that. Going on to 13A, Communication, Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, Rural Development, Flynn Road, as we notice that. Section 17, Jordan River. Councillor Palmer, I'm going to go to you to comment if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I'll formalize it with a motion to receive this package.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on the motion to receive?
I'm obviously pleased that we have that, the conditional withdrawal. I'll remind council that the province gives, but can take away very quickly as well. It's 10 years, but it's not a guaranteed 10 years. This is the first step. I see this as a first step in protecting those lands for the greater community good. The other little comment that I'll make is there's some in the community that have a perception that we are robbing the resources that are desperately needed. And I'll just, a response to that is that sand pits are not, gravel pits are not an endangered species in Revelstoke. There's lots of gravel, there's lots of more opportunities that are out there. This is a very special place in the gravel pit that was and thankfully the license, the person that had the license chose not to exercise it. And so it was a very small one compared to the overall resources that are on the west side. And I think we'll have more dialogue on that in the future.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion on the table to receive? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you all. Development Services, APC minutes, January 8th. Any comments or questions regarding those minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to go on to questions from the press. Ms. Floyd, do we have any questions from the press?
No, we do not, Your Worship.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to move in camera pursuant to section 90.1E and K of the Community Charter. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Ryan, second by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We will now move in camera. Before we go to in camera, so as staff are reorganizing and